Got it.
So here we are on the first chapter again, finishing the first chapter, which is Death and Immortality, page 107, top of 107. If the individual soul has been exhausting an excess of evil sanskaras and has therefore been undergoing a hell state, he or she may jump into a new incarnation, which good sanskaras tend to dominate. The cause of this unexpected reversal is to be found in the strength of flow of the sanskaric currents. At the time he incarnates, the individual has already been relieved of the excess of his evil sanskaras, and the strong tide of his good sanskaras was about to predominate. Consequently, it is the vigorous current of the good sanskaras which motivates him in his new incarnation. Thus, a man who has been a profligate in his last life might begin his new incarnation with a marked inclination towards asceticism. Conversely, a swing over can occur from good to bad when one jumps into an incarnation from a heaven state in which the preponderance of good sanskaras has been exhausted through intense imaginative pleasure. The moment of incarnation into a new physical body is precipitated when the good and bad sanskaras have almost balanced each other, and the tide of bad sanskaras is about to predominate. A changeover at incarnation from good to bad or from bad to good should not be taken as a universal law. Reversal of individual nature is frequent, but cases are also quite common in which the individual remains persistently good or bad for several incarnations. In such cases, incarnation occurs before the opposite type of sanskara has built up a sufficient current of flow to result in its predominance. The beginning of the true existence of the individual self, and that's starred, not to be confused with the manifestation of the individual soul, which occurred at the very beginning of the long evolutive process through the various subgaseous, gaseous, stone, metal, vegetable, fish, and animal forms. See God Speaks, Mayor Baba. So, the beginning of the true existence of the individual self occurs at the moment when consciousness, in the course of its evolution, adopts its first human form. This also represents the terminal step in its evolutionary development. This is the moment when the limited individuality is crystallized as the I that exhibits the basic characteristics of self consciousness. This is the true birth of the individual. The true death of the individual occurs at the moment when he transcends his limited individuality or separative consciousness by being taken up in the truth consciousness of the unlimited and undivided being of God. The true death of the individual consists in the complete disappearance of the limiting ego mind that has created the sanskaric veil of ignorance. True death is a far more difficult process than physical death, but when it occurs through the grace of the Master, it takes no longer than the twinkling of an eye. This dissolution of the ego mind and the freeing of the soul from the illusion of separative, limited individuality are known as liberation. The sanskara-ridden ego mind can never attain any real poise. It vacillates in constant rhythm to the alternating dominant sanskaras. Consciousness can attain true poise only when the ego mind, with all its attendant sanskaras, terminates. This is effected through the emergence of the unlimited and ultra sanskaric individuality that comes into its own upon the inheriting of consciousness, eternal existence, which is true immortality. Marian?
The infinite poise of consciousness in realization should not be confused with the semblance of sanskaric equilibration that is approached by the limited ego mind in discarnate life in the hell or heaven state. Such ineffable poise is unapproachable by the full consciousness in man as long as it remains clouded by the slightest traces of the limiting ego mind. At the time of taking on a new physical body, the good and the bad sanskaras of the individual are almost in balance. However, there is always a slight ascendance at this time of either the good or the bad sanskaras. They are never in perfect balance, nor do they in any manner overlap or cancel one another. Complete poise can exist only when the two opposite classes of sanskaras are so qualitatively and quantitatively opposed that they exactly cancel one another. When opposite sanskaras are not only equal in strength, but also are in exact qualitative opposition, they cancel each other and can no longer act as a semi-automatic subjective propelling forces, but are transmuted into consummate understanding that is free from opposing reactions to life. This is the state of liberation. The seeming balance that is approximated by the individual before each birth may be compared to a tug of war in which opposite forces are active, although neither may predominate. The matching of forces then has only to be slightly disturbed, and the entire situation becomes subject to change. In the same manner, the pseudopoise of sanskaras present at the time of birth has only to be slightly disturbed in order to imprint the sanskaric pattern for the individual life. In the state of realization, the opposite types of sanskaras interpenetrate each other in such a manner that they cease to exist as opposing forces. The resultant is not a state of sanskaric tension, but a state of complete internal neutralization in which the sanskaras have ceased to exist as propulsive elements. This is not a mere state of exact mathematical equalization of opposites, but a state beyond the opposites, of true poise rooted in unbroken consciousness of infinite unity. During the entire long period preceding realization, the mind acts in each single circumstance according to the dictates of the preponderant sanskaras. Now, the words have run a little bit over on the right side to be blocked out. Can it be moved a little to the left? No. Okay, that's it. As in a tug of war, there is movement in the direction of greater pull. But that motion represents only a small proportion of the total energy spent, for most of it was used up in the opposition of forces. In realization, there is an entire disappearance or cancellation of the sanskaras, such as would occur in a tug of war, when the opposing parties finish the game and stop pulling in opposite directions. On the other hand, in near equalization of sanskaric tension, there is only a temporary arrest of express activity. Then, when some new or outside factor upsets this equilibrium, reactions occur which show that the situation had been quiet, not because of lack of propelling forces, but because they had temporarily canceled one another. There's an asterisk. And this is, the asterisk is 4 paragraphs. This analysis has the greatest possible practical significance in considering the adjustment of the individual to his environment. It often happens that balancing forces in environment tend to bring a very difficult personal situation into temporary equilibrium. At this point, the individual tends to regard the situation as solved because he is no longer aware of any intense localized pressure. However, eventually those balancing forces will shift, and once more the situation will seem to fly out of control. This is usually very discouraging because the sequence may be repeated several times without apparent improvement. The individual then often asks himself why he should continue to try, as he never seems to find a lasting solution to his problems. But the poise originally established was due only to a happy combination of forces, sanskaras, that almost canceled each other. Final release comes as the basic motivating forces are dissolved and reabsorbed in the process of ultimate realization. This may seem a discouragingly remote solution to the pressing problem of the moment. But in such a final solution, the answer is complete and the poise absolute, because the forces themselves have been annihilated and lost.
Thanks, Miriam. Rolf, are you reading tonight?
I could read a little, I think. We'll try. If I start coughing and having problems, we'll give it up. Is that okay with the annulment?
Certainly, yeah, with the annulment.
With the annulment of the sanskaras, the individual is freed permanently from all sanskaric determination. As a consequence, for the first time, the individual's life can express itself without latent or patent inhibitions, for it functions in the limitless understanding of truth. This true poise of realization, which admits no further possibility of disturbance through resurrection of any limiting tendencies, can only be obtained while the individual has a physical body. It can never come through the speeding up process of one-sided sanskaric exhaustion that takes place in the hell state or heaven state. This is the all-important reason why every individual has to come back to the gross world again and again in physical incarnation until self-realization is attained. Alternating links of the continuous chain of individual existence consists of incarnate and discarnate lives, forged from periods of birth to death and death to birth. Only in God realization can life be freed from the shackles of limited individuality. Only in God realization does the tenacious chain of recurrent incarnations reach final fulfillment and determination. It is in a state of eternal existence, free from birth and death. It is true immortality or deathlessness by virtue of the fact that it is above the birth and death of the body. I didn't get that, sorry. It is true immortality or deathlessness by virtue of the fact that it is above the birth and death of the body. True immortality is not the survival of the limited individual in the period following the death of the physical body. It is true that the ego mind persists unscathed through death, but the individual Eugene, you with us? The individual cannot, does not thereby attain final freedom from death, birth, and death. Survival should not be confused with deathlessness, which is true immortality. The chain of alternating incarnate and discarnate life is only a survival of consciousness plus ignorance. And ignorance makes true life impossible. Life in ignorance is the very negation of existence in truth. It is so basic a curtailment of true existence that, when judged by the standards of true existence and eternity, it had best be termed a continuous death. Only in realization is consciousness emancipated from the tyranny of this continuous death, which nullifies the true life in eternity. And only in liberation can consciousness arrive at that true immortality, which lies beyond all curtailment and obscurity. Whoa. The individual who has achieved realization of the truth is initiated into eternal and unlimited life. For the limiting ego mind, with all its attendant sanskaras, has undergone a death that is final. In this process, the limited individuality is shed, and the soul is invested with unlimited divine individuality. This may be termed a journey of the soul, but it is by no means the first journey.
Thank you, Ralph.
Yes,
Malu.
Sorry, yes. So the first journey consisted in the evolving of consciousness through the evolutionary process, starting in the most rudimentary sub-gaseous forms and ending in the attainment of full consciousness in the human form. This journey extends from the initial attainment of consciousness by the individual soul to birth of the limited human individuality, in which full consciousness has been achieved, but a consciousness is still clouded and ridden with samskaras. The second journey of the soul consists in the involution of the new fully evolved consciousness through the removal of clouds of samskaras. The removal requires the effort of numberless lifetimes and lasts from the birth of the limited human individuality to its termination in the unlimited truth. This second journey brings the individual to the unlimited and untrammeled state of infinite existence or immortality, and is considered in great detail in chapter 6. The terminus of this journey is known in Sufi literature as Fana Fillah, the final annihilation of the limited ego in the conscious state of God. At the end of the first journey, the soul becomes conscious of Maya, or the illusion of duality. The domain of Maya has only imaginary existence. The entire universe, thus, in reality is only a zero. But the zero exists for the fully evolved consciousness of the individual human being. But this zero exists for the fully evolved consciousness of the individual human being. Maya gives to the life of the individual all the meaning that it has, and the imaginary universe of Maya continues to have a semblance of reality and significance until the wayfarer arrives at the terminus of the second journey, or Fana Fillah. In the state of Fana Fillah, the universe disappears and has neither existence nor value. This is the true and final terminus point of the great journey. It is reached when the ego mind has met its total and final death, from which no resurrection is possible. Then only God exists as the supreme and sole reality, and the universe has become a true zero without existence, even in imagination. At this terminus, the individual's consciousness is endowed with divine individuality, and he is known as a Majzub Kamil. At the time of the extinction of the ego mind or limited individuality, and the conscious union of the soul in the oversoul, consciousness is withdrawn completely from the physical, subtle, and mental bodies. And these are usually dropped within 4 days. When the Majzub's body, which for him does not exist, does actually drop, it is sustained by the devotees or lovers who have been attached to him through that body. When the Majzub was a wayfarer, during the second journey, he may have had several friends who loved him and expected spiritual guidance from him. The sanskaric links thus formed by such friends to the physical body of the wayfarer now cause the body of the Majzub to go on living, even though he is no longer linked in any way with it. The bhaktas or devotees of the Majzub provide sustenance for his physical body, which keeps on functioning automatically, and by their link with it, the devotees derive much spiritual benefit. But all this activity of the body is completely automatic and involves no conscious interest on the part of the Majzub. After the purpose of the sanskaric link formed by the bhaktas to the physical form of the Majzub has been fulfilled, the body of the Majzub ceases functioning and is dropped. When the body of one who has arrived at unlimited truth is automatically dropped at the end of 4 days, or is dropped after its link to the devotees has been fulfilled, the event can be properly termed neither death nor a journey. It cannot be said to be death because at the time the body is dropped, it has no connection with the consciousness of the person who was once attached to it. The link with the soul has already been snapped, and the body continues only on the universal flow of the divine benevolence. Death is a severance of the connection between consciousness and the physical body. And since in the two cases just described, the body retains no connection with the consciousness, they are not properly cases of death.
Thank you,
Is it
Mahu.
sure.
Thanks, Mahu. Marian.
Nor is it at all suitable to call such deaths journeys of the consciousness, for the dropping of the physical body makes no difference to the consciousness that was once attached to it. With or without the body, consciousness remains what it had become upon the complete vanishing of separative individuality, abidingly illumined and infinitely absorbed in truth. If, as occurs in rare cases, truth realized consciousness returns to normal consciousness of the body and of the universe without diminution or curtailment of realization, this event is properly described as the third journey. This third journey is undertaken only by the perfect master, Sadgurus, Kutubs, who, upon returning to consciousness of body and universe, establish their divine and unlimited individuality in the apparent world of duality. This state of affirmation of unbounded truth in and through the universe of Maya is known in Sufi terminology as Bakabila, or abiding simultaneously in God and in illusion. The apparent universe now has existence for the divine individuality. But at this terminus of the third journey, the universe is realized as being nothing and having absolutely no value. The only thing that has real value is God. And the Sadguru sees that the entire universe has no reality in itself and exists only as the apparent manifestation of God. If zeros are placed after the number 1, for instance, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, each zero assumes value, not because it has value in itself, but because it is placed after the number 1. In the Maya-ridden state, the relative status of the zeros and the number 1 are not realized. The two are confused together so that the zeros, which constitute the physical universe, are taken to have both existence and value in themselves. In the Phana-phila state of truth absorption, all the zeros of the entire universe that have been added onto the number 1 have been cut out. Only the 1, for instance, 1, and then 6 zeros crossed out, only the 1 exists. In the Bhaka or Sadguru state of truth affirmation in the universe, all the zeros of the universe reappear. But they are placed from a mathematical standpoint before the number 1. For instance, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. In this manner of reinstatement, the zeros have existence, but no value, regardless of how many there are. In this last case, any increase in the number of zeros neither adds numerical value nor alters in any way the value of the number 1. The value neither increases nor decreases. A perfect master can perform any miracle. This does not involve any breaking of the law because he is beyond the domain of Maya and its laws. Among those who enjoy the Sadguru state, the avatar has unique consciousness. The Sadguru experiences the state of I am God and God is everything, while the avatar experiences the state of I am God and I am everything. Man as God, that is Sadguru, sees God in everything. But God as man, that is avatar, sees what God as God sees, himself in everything. In fact, the avatar not only sees himself in everything, but sees himself as everything. Not only as being in the many, but as being the many in exactly the same manner that he is the one. When the avatar or the Sadguru drops his body, after finishing his spiritual task in the imaginary universe of duality, he retains the God consciousness that is his continuous eternal state. This fourth and last journey of the avatar and perfect masters is the same as the second journey of the Majzub et Kamil. Their unlimited individualities suffer no extinction in spite of the fact that they are now removed entirely beyond the world of forms. their individualities persist because their divine, unlimited consciousness abidingly remains as the very inalienable nature of the soul, which requires no form for its locus standi. Sanskaras, or the sanskaric ego mind, can subsist only by attaching itself to some form. But no expressive medium of form is in any way necessary for the existence of divine consciousness. This, the very nature of the soul, is self-sustained.
Thank you, Marian. Rolf, would you care to read some more?
I'd be pleased to. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay. The dropping of the physical body by the avatar or by the Sadguru is not death. For even while he uses the body, he is in no way attached to it and has no sanskaric link with it. Nor does the dropping of the body in these instances involve the usual survival of a limited individuality or ego mind, for these are simply non-existent in the Sadguru and the avatar. Their dropping of the body also differs from the death of advanced yogis who may voluntarily drop their physical bodies after completing their work. The advanced yogis cannot discard their ego mind or limited individuality, which clings fast to them even after severance of their connection with the physical body. But the Majub-i-Kamil, the Sadguru, and the Avatar embark upon a unique and direct journey to the unbounded and individual ocean of divinity. Chapter 2, the cycle of sleep and waking. To sleep is to surrender to one of the primary forces of life. Sleep is an inescapable need. There can be no substitute for it, although adjustment within certain degrees to its demands is possible, such as choosing 11 o'clock instead of 10 for retiring. Such adjustments can be made only within the well-defined limits. Within well-defined limits, there can be no tampering with the strict requirements for sleep over any considerable length of time. For the average man, prolonged abstention from sleep inevitably results in bodily disorder as well as impairments or even derangement of the mind. The mind loses its normal alertness and deteriorates markedly in its ability to concentrate and work out abstruse problems. Further, it loses its ability to cope with the problems presented by everyday life. Sleep, being one of the most significant phenomena in the existence of the individual, must be thoroughly understood if the purpose of life itself is to be fully comprehended. Any attempt to give an explanation of sleep in purely physiological terms will be incomplete and misleading, as well as people consider sleep to be the inevitable result of exhaustion of the higher nerve centers of the brain. Some attribute the cause of sleep to the accumulation of metabolic and other deterioration I think I screwed that up. Excuse me.
No, no, it's correct.
Did I?
And
So-
other deterioration products in the brain.
Attribute the cause of sleep to the accumulation of metabolic and other deterioration products in the brain. Others regard sleep as the product of inhibition of higher brain centers by nerve impulses generated in specialized sleep centers. Still, other authorities regard sleep as the natural condition of the brain, and they consider consciousness to be the result of activating the brain through external stimuli. Sleep, in their opinion, is therefore a relapse into the natural state of the brain, which occurs on withdrawal of these external stimuli. The essence of all these physiological explanations is that sleep is a byproduct of the physical brain. This is a radically wrong conclusion. A more profound interpretation is required to do justice to the real status of consciousness and its relation to body and soul. Throughout evolution, consciousness is developed in and through the mind and expressed through the evolving medium of physical form. But consciousness itself resides in the soul. This body is only the medium through which consciousness expresses itself. Through the ages, a single life impulse, individualized soul, gradually becomes more conscious as it expresses itself through a myriad of forms. The consciousness thus developed is the possession of the mind, and it does not vanish with the disappearance of the physical vehicle. The physical form also evolves as consciousness unfolds. Bodily forms emerge one after another in continuous and ascending order, so that the total consciousness might develop progressively through a fitting progression of form vehicles. Consciousness is not a coincidental product of physiological processes, but the very reason for the existence of all forms.
Thank you, Rob.
Yes, Jay Bob.
Mahu, please.
Consciousness is the standard by which the distinctions between sleep and waking should be understood. In wakefulness, the mind becomes conscious and expresses itself through the body. In sleep, the mind relapses into a quiescent state of the soul without outer expression. Physiologically, the states of sleeping and waking may be described as the retarding and accelerating of the higher brain centers, but they are more significantly defined as the submerging and emerging of consciousness. In order to answer the basic question of why consciousness should oscillate between the quiescent state of sleep and the active state of wakefulness, one must attack the problem of the primary origin of consciousness. Before the beginning of all beginnings, the infinite ocean of God was completely self-forgetful. The utter and unrelieved oblivion of the self-forgetful infinite ocean of God in the beyond state was broken in order that God should consciously know his own fullness of divinity. It was for this sole purpose the consciousness proceeded to evolve. Consciousness itself was latent in the beyond state of God. Also latent in this same beyond state of God was the original whim or lahar to become conscious. It was this original whim which brought latent consciousness into manifestation or form for the first time. Slowly and tediously, consciousness approaches its apex in the human form, which is the goal of the evolutionary process, and thereby an individual mind gradually differentiates itself from the sea of oblivion. However, the conscious individual still does not comprehend the truth of the real self. On the contrary, there is produced in man a false sense of limitation and frustration. A full consciousness that is laboriously produced in the evolutionary process and that takes the place of utter forgetfulness remains finite because it is replete with countless impressions or sanskaras of fulfilled and unfulfilled desires that have been acquired while inhabiting the many finite bodies. Originally, it was the lahar that caused consciousness to manifest. In everyday life, it is the impressions or samskaras that cause latent consciousness in the sleep state to manifest itself as active consciousness in the awake state. Although the sea of oblivion has been swept back through the development of consciousness, yet it has been exchanged for a growing nightmare of ever-increasing futility. Forgetfulness has been displaced by remembrance, but it is a remembrance charged with limitation, helplessness, and binding desires. The full but finite human consciousness struggles to find self-expression and self-gratification. But even these efforts are subject to the samskaric compulsions. They prevent man from recapturing the original truth of his being and subject him to increasing limitation and helplessness. He is like a spider caught in a web of his own making. As a means of respite, consciousness seeks the oblivion of deep sleep, where it again surrenders itself temporarily to the sea of self-forgetfulness, the original beyond state of God. In sound sleep, consciousness becomes latent for the time being, until the burden of unspent samskaras forces it to manifest again in the awake state. In his desperate attempts during wakefulness to overcome his feeling of helplessness and boredom, man may attempt to escape from himself through the exciting emotions of loss or anger. Although drowning oneself in lust or anger may seem to promise escape, the satisfaction achieved is only temporary. Inevitably, a strong counter sense of remorse or depression is induced that is worse than the original sense of frustration. On the collective level, wars provide the exciting avenue of escape that subsequently reacts to numb the spirit of man with an overwhelming sense of burden. Nature has striven to evolve consciousness through long ages of painful struggle. It is a great tragedy that when consciousness faces an acute need to free itself from entanglement, it should regress instead by resorting to the deadening of sensibility. This expedient is disastrous because it involves a conscious attempt to undo the achievements of natural evolution.
Thank you, Mahu. I'll take a turn. None of man's waking attempts to overcome his feeling of intolerable weariness is wholly acceptable to the soul. All are dissatisfying in the long run. Hence, man seeks rest and refreshment by withdrawing temporarily into the oblivion of deep sleep. This physiological necessity for sleep cannot be avoided, just as the physical body requires alternating periods of activity and rest, so the mind also needs such periods. Sleep is the means by which the mind withdraws temporarily from the pressure exerted by its age-old load of impressions and desires. Through sleep, the mind refreshes itself temporarily for further participation in the game of becoming self-conscious. If the self were completely aware of its true God nature during waking consciousness, it would find no need to withdraw into the self-forgetfulness of sleep. Its spontaneous joy would be an eternal wellspring of divine refreshment. When man seeks freedom from the ennui of the waking state by losing consciousness in the sleep state, no slightest destruction of consciousness occurs. Deep sleep is an inward withdrawal of consciousness into a condition of temporary oblivion. In this state, the mind is completely quiescent. It does not experience the helplessness of finite self-consciousness, nor is it aware of the true self as the illimitable truth. Both the finite illusory world and the real infinite state are forgotten as consciousness sinks into the sea of oblivion. In deep sleep, consciousness exists merely as a latent possibility, which must again be aroused to activity. Sleep stands in the same relationship to consciousness as death does to life. Death is not the annihilation of life, but its transference to another state of being. In the same way, sleep is not the annihilation of consciousness, but its withdrawal into a state of abeyance, whether latent as unconsciousness or manifested as consciousness. Consciousness is always there. This matter may be summarized as follows. After going to sleep, when man ordinarily enters the ordinary dream state, A, he has no consciousness of the body. B, the link with the physical body remains intact. C, pain and pleasure are experienced for a short period. D, the man wakes up in the same physical body. After physical death, the man also enters the dream state, and A, he has no consciousness of the body. B, the link with that particular physical body is snapped for good. C, because the link with the gross no longer exists, he experiences pain or pleasure, the states of heaven and hell, far more intensely, whether for a long or short period. And D, he wakes up in the gross in another physical body. The passage from sleep to wakefulness consists in the passage from A, unconsciousness, to B, subconsciousness, and finally to C, full consciousness. Normally, for the ordinary man, these consist of A, sound sleep, equals unconsciousness. B, dreams equals subconsciousness of duality. And C, roused from sleep equals full consciousness of duality. When a man loses consciousness, as in a high fever, he is subconscious, as in the dream state. But if he is rendered unconscious through drugs such as chloroform, he is unconscious, as in the sound sleep state. Unconsciousness always involves temporary return to the original beyond state of God, regardless of the cause, whether it be sound sleep, drugs, or a physical accident. Although the subject of the path and its disciplines is considered in detail later, it is of interest to note in this connection that for those on the path, the three states are, and we'll stop here at the bottom of page 120. Pick it up next time.
Wonderful.